The coastal town of Kavunda Bay was glowing with warm lights that evening. Music played softly from houses, and families were gathering to celebrate Thanksgiving together. Nolenga stood outside her parents' large home, holding her little son Kito's hand. The smell of roasted turkey and spices drifted through the open windows. For a moment she hesitated at the door. She hadn't come back here in years. Kito looked up at her with innocent eyes. "Mom, is this Grandma's house?" he asked. Nolenga forced a small smile and nodded. "Yes, sweetheart." She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Inside, the dining table was full of food and laughter. Plates were stacked high, candles flickered, and relatives were chatting happily. But the moment Nolenga stepped inside, the room suddenly grew quiet. Conversations slowed. Several people turned to look at her. Then Belisa noticed her. Nolenga's sister leaned back in her chair and slowly rolled her eyes. A bitter smile crossed her face. She leaned closer to their parents and whispered something under her breath. Nolenga couldn't hear the words, but she saw the reaction immediately. Her mother's smile faded. Her father's face became stiff. The warm family atmosphere that filled the room only seconds ago suddenly felt cold and uncomfortable. Trying to stay calm, Nolenga walked toward the table with Kito beside her. "Happy Thanksgiving," she said softly. No one answered. Kito squeezed her hand tighter, sensing the tension. Then Nolenga's father slowly stood up from his chair. The entire room went silent as everyone looked at him. He cleared his throat and spoke in a firm voice. "If Belisa feels uncomfortable, it would be better if you left." For a second, Nolenga thought she had heard him wrong. The words hung heavily in the air. Around the table, relatives avoided her eyes. No one defended her. No one spoke. And in that painful moment, Nolenga realized something that hurt more than anything else. Her own parents had just chosen her sister over her. For a few seconds, Nolenga just stood there frozen. The words her father had spoken still echoed in her ears. She looked around the table, hoping someone would say something, anything. Maybe her mother would defend her. Maybe one of the relatives would tell her father he was being unfair. But no one spoke. Belisa simply sat there with a small, satisfied smile on her face. Nolenga slowly pulled out a chair and tried to sit down quietly, hoping the moment would pass. She hadn't even tasted the food yet. Kito climbed onto the chair beside her, looking excited at the large table full of dishes. But before Nolenga could touch her plate, her mother suddenly stood up. Without saying a word, she walked to the coat rack near the door, took Nolenga's coat, and placed it into her hands. The message was clear. "You should go now," her mother said quietly, avoiding eye contact. Nolenga felt her chest tighten. "Mom, it's Thanksgiving," she said softly. "We just arrived." Her mother sighed impatiently and walked to the door. She opened it wide, letting the cold evening air rush inside. "It's better if you leave," she said again. Little Kito looked up at Nolenga, confused. "Mom, are we going already?" Nolenga couldn't find the right words. Her throat felt tight. Slowly, she helped Kito put on his small jacket and took his hand. They stepped outside. The night air was cold and sharp against her face. The door closed behind them with a quiet click. For a moment, Nolenga just stood there on the front steps, holding her son's hand. Through the large dining room window, she could still see the table inside. The candles were glowing warmly. Plates were being passed around. And just seconds after she left, the laughter started again. It was as if nothing had happened, as if she had never been there. Kito turned around and looked through the window too. He watched the people inside for a few seconds, his small face full of confusion. Then he gently pulled on Nolenga's hand. "Mom?" She looked down at him. His voice was soft and innocent when he asked the question that broke her heart completely. "Why don't they like us?" Nolenga felt tears burn behind her eyes. For a moment she couldn't speak. How could she explain something like this to a child? She knelt down in front of him and held his small shoulders. "It's not you, Kito," she whispered softly. "You did nothing wrong." But even as she said those words, the pain in her chest grew heavier. Because the truth was far more painful. It wasn't just strangers who had rejected her tonight. It was her own family. The streets of Kavunda Bay were quiet that night. Most families were inside their homes, laughing, eating, and celebrating Thanksgiving together. But Nolenga walked slowly along the sidewalk with her son Kito, the cold wind brushing against her face. The warm lights from the houses only made her feel more alone. Kito held her hand tightly as they walked. After a while he grew tired, so Nolanga picked him up and carried him in her arms. His small head rested on her shoulder. As she walked through the familiar streets of the town where she grew up, old memories slowly began to return. This town once felt like home. But everything had changed years ago. The truth was, Belisa hadn't always hated her like this. When they were younger, they used to laugh together and share secrets like normal sisters. But everything changed the day their grandfather passed away and left a small inheritance for both of them. It wasn't a huge fortune, but it was enough to start something meaningful. Belisa had big dreams. She wanted to open a fashion boutique in Kavunda Bay. She came to Nolanga one evening, excited and full of plans. "Let's combine our money," Belisa had said. "If we invest together, the business will grow faster." At first, Nolanga had listened carefully. But after looking at Belisa's plans, she realized something worrying. The business idea wasn't stable. Belisa had no experience, no real plan, and she was already planning to spend most of the money on expensive decorations and advertising. Nolanga tried to explain calmly. "I'm sorry, Belisa," she said at the time. "I can't risk my entire inheritance on this. I want to save it and build something slowly." But Belisa didn't hear caution. She only heard rejection. From that moment on, everything changed. Belisa began telling people that Nolanga was selfish. She told their parents that Nolanga didn't trust her own family. She painted a picture of Nolanga as someone arrogant who thought she was smarter than everyone else. Slowly, those lies started spreading. Friends began treating Nolanga differently. Relatives whispered behind her back. Even her own parents started looking at her with disappointment. No matter how many times Nolanga tried to explain, no one really listened. Eventually, the pressure became too heavy. So Nolanga made the hardest decision of her life. She left Kavunda Bay. She packed her things, took her young son Kito, and moved to another city far away. She didn't know what the future would look like. She didn't have a clear plan. But she knew one thing. She would rather start from nothing than stay in a place where people believed lies about her. And from that day forward, Nolanga quietly began rebuilding her life, step by step with dignity. When Nolanga first arrived in Merna City, she had almost nothing with her. Just a small suitcase, a little money from her inheritance, and her young son Kito. The city was bigger and louder than Kavunda Bay. Tall buildings stood close together, cars filled the streets, and strangers passed by without even looking at each other. At the beginning, life was not easy. Nolanga rented a tiny room near the beach. The walls were old, the furniture was simple, and sometimes she worried about how she would pay the next month's rent. But every morning she reminded herself why she had come there. She wanted a better life for her son. A few days after arriving, Nolanga found a job at a small beachside cafe. It was nothing fancy, just a quiet place where tourists came to drink coffee and watch the ocean waves. She worked long hours cleaning tables, serving drinks, and helping in the kitchen. Many nights she came home exhausted, but she never complained. While working there, Nolanga carefully watched how the cafe was run. She noticed what customers liked and what they complained about. She paid attention to which dishes sold the most and which ones were ignored. The owner of the cafe slowly began to notice her dedication. One evening he said, "You understand this place better than some of my managers." Little by little, he trusted her with more responsibilities. Nolanga helped improve the menu, suggested new ideas, and made the service better. Soon the cafe became more popular. More customers came. The profits grew. And when the owner decided he wanted to retire and move abroad, he offered something surprising. He offered to sell the cafe to Nolanga. At first she couldn't believe it, but she used the money she had saved and took the biggest risk of her life. She bought it. From that moment, Nolanga worked even harder than before. She expanded the menu, renovated the place, and created a warm atmosphere where people loved to gather. The small cafe slowly turned into the most popular spot along the beach. And Nolanga didn't stop there. Over the next several years, she opened more restaurants along the coast. One became two. Two became 5. Eventually, her small idea grew into a successful chain of restaurants known across Merna City. With her growing success, Nolanga began investing her money wisely. She quietly purchased properties along the coast, small buildings, shops, and even large houses. She never bragged about it. She never told anyone about her growing success. including her own family. And among those properties was something very surprising. Years earlier, when her parents' luxury estate in Kavunda Bay had fallen into heavy debt, the bank quietly put it up for sale. A private investor bought it. No one in her family ever discovered the truth. That investor was Nolenga. For many years, Nolenga kept her success quiet. She never posted about it online. She never bragged about it to anyone in Kavunda Bay. As far as her family knew, she had left the town and was probably struggling somewhere far away. But the truth was very different. While Nolenga was building her restaurant business in Merna City, she was also learning how to invest her money wisely. She spoke with financial advisors, studied the property market, and slowly began buying buildings and land along the coast. She wasn't interested in showing off wealth. She only wanted security for herself and her son. One evening, about 3 years after she had opened her second restaurant, her financial advisor called her with an interesting opportunity. "There's a luxury property in Kavunda Bay going to a bank auction," he told her. At first, Nolenga didn't pay much attention. She had tried to forget that town. Too many painful memories lived there. But when the advisor mentioned the address, Nolenga froze. It was her parents' house, the large estate where she had grown up, the house where she had laughed as a child, celebrated birthdays, and once believed her family would always protect her. Her advisor explained the situation. Her parents had taken several loans over the years, trying to maintain their expensive lifestyle. Slowly, the debts had grown bigger and bigger. Eventually, the bank took control of the property. But instead of publicly removing her parents, the bank decided to quietly sell the house to a private investor who would allow them to stay. Nolenga sat silently for a long time after hearing that. Part of her felt angry. Another part of her felt sad. But in the end, she made a decision. She bought the house. Not because she wanted revenge. Not because she wanted to embarrass her family. She bought it because, despite everything, a small part of her still cared about them. She didn't want to see her parents lose their home and face public shame. So she became the quiet owner of the property. Her parents continued living there, believing they still owned everything. Years passed, and Nolenga never told them the truth. She told herself it didn't matter anymore. She had built her own life. She had her son, her business, and her independence. But tonight, everything felt different. Standing outside in the cold after being thrown out of Thanksgiving dinner, Nolenga remembered every detail of that house. The dining room window where she had just seen her family laughing without her. The door that had been closed in her face. The moment her parents chose Belisa over her. And over their own grandson. Something deep inside Nolenga shifted. For years she had stayed silent. She had forgiven. She had walked away. But tonight's humiliation awakened a feeling she had buried for a very long time. And for the first time in years, Nolenga began to wonder if it was finally time for her family to learn the truth. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over Kavunda Bay. The ocean waves moved calmly, and the town looked peaceful, as if nothing painful had happened the night before. But Nolenga had barely slept. The image of the door closing in her face and the sound of her family laughing inside the house kept replaying in her mind. Each time she remembered Kito's small voice asking, "Why don't they like us?" her heart felt heavier. She looked at her son sleeping beside her and gently brushed his hair away from his forehead. Then she made a decision. Nolenga picked up her phone and dialed her parents' number. After a few rings, her mother answered. Her voice sounded cold and slightly irritated. "Hello. Good morning, Mom," Nolenga said calmly. There was a short silence on the other side. "What do you want?" her mother asked. Nolenga took a slow breath. "I'd like to invite you and Dad to a small family meeting today at the house." Her mother sounded surprised. "At the house?" "Yes," Nolenga replied politely. "I think it's time we talk properly." Her mother hesitated for a moment. Then she sighed. "Fine. We'll come." Just as Nolenga was about to end the call, she heard another voice in the background. "Belisa. Who is it?" Belisa asked loudly. "It's Nolenga," their mother replied. There was a short pause, and then Belisa's mocking laugh filled the phone. "Oh really?" Belisa said with a sarcastic tone. Did she finally realize she ruined Thanksgiving dinner? Nolenga stayed silent, listening. Belisa continued speaking loudly, clearly wanting Nolenga to hear every word. "She probably wants to apologize," Belisa said. Maybe she finally understands she shouldn't show up where she's not welcome. Nolenga felt a small sting in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. Please come at noon, she said simply. Her mother gave a short response. We'll be there. The call ended. Across town, inside the large family house, Belisa leaned back in her chair with a smug smile. See, she said confidently to their parents, I told you she'd come begging sooner or later. Their father shrugged. Maybe she realized she embarrassed herself yesterday. Belisa laughed again. Good. She should apologize. But what none of them knew was that Nolenga wasn't planning to beg for forgiveness. For years, she had stayed quiet and walked away from their insults. But today would be different. 'Cause this time, Nolenga was the one inviting them into a house that secretly belonged to her. Around noon, Nolenga arrived at the house in Kavunda Bay. The large gates opened slowly as she drove inside. For a moment, she looked at the familiar building in front of her. The same tall windows, the same wide front steps, the same garden she used to play in as a child. But today felt very different. Quito walked beside her as they entered the house. Inside, everything looked exactly the same as the night before. The large dining table was still there. The chairs were neatly arranged. It was the same room where she had been told to leave. A few minutes later, her parents arrived. Her father walked in first, looking serious and impatient. Her mother followed behind him. Belisa came last, dressed neatly and wearing a confident smile. The moment Belisa saw Nolenga standing calmly in the living room, she let out a small laugh. Well, this is interesting, Belisa said, crossing her arms. So where is the big apology? Nolenga didn't react to the comment. Please sit down, she said politely. Her parents sat on the couch looking slightly confused. Belisa dropped into a chair and leaned back comfortably, as if she was about to enjoy a show. Let's hear it, Belisa said. You called us here. Before Nolenga could respond, the front door opened again. A middle-aged man wearing a dark suit walked inside, carrying a leather folder filled with documents. Everyone turned to look at him. Belisa frowned. Who is that? Nolenga spoke calmly. This is Mr. Kamau. The man nodded politely. Good afternoon. Belisa looked confused. Why is there a lawyer here? Mr. Kamau stepped forward and placed the folder on the table. He opened it slowly and took out several official papers. I'm here to clarify the legal ownership of this property, he said in a calm, professional voice. Her father frowned. What are you talking about? This is our house. Mr. Kamau looked at the documents carefully before continuing. I'm afraid that is not correct. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Belisa laughed nervously. What kind of joke is this? Mr. Kamau continued speaking, his voice steady and clear. Several years ago, this property was taken over by the bank due to unpaid debts. Shortly after that, it was sold to a private investor. Nolenga's mother slowly sat up straighter. Her father's face became tense. Belisa looked confused. And who bought it? Her father asked. Mr. Kamau turned slightly toward Nolenga. Then he spoke the words that changed everything. The legal owner of this house is Ms. Nolenga Kavira. For a few seconds no one moved. The words seemed to hang in the air. Belisa's confident smile slowly disappeared. Her parents stared at Nolenga in complete shock. And in that silent moment, they finally realized something unbelievable. The daughter they had forced out of Thanksgiving dinner the night before was the true owner of the house they were sitting in. For several long seconds the room stayed completely silent. Belisa stared at Nolenga as if she had just heard something impossible. Her parents looked from Nolenga to the lawyer, and then back again, trying to understand what was happening. This can't be true, Belisa finally said, forcing out a laugh. Nolenga doesn't have that kind of money. Mr. Kamau calmly slid the documents across the table. You are welcome to read the ownership papers, he said. Nolenga didn't move. She simply stood there quietly while her father slowly picked up the papers with trembling hands. His eyes moved across the lines of legal text. The more he read, the paler his face became. Her mother leaned closer to look. Belisa stood up quickly and grabbed another page. But every page showed the same name. Nolenga Kavira. Belisa's confident expression slowly disappeared. Finally Nolenga spoke. Her voice was calm, but there was deep emotion behind it. You all thought I left Kavunda Bay with nothing, she said. You believed the story that I was selfish, that I failed, that I was struggling somewhere. She paused for a moment, looking around the familiar living room. But while you believed those things, I was building a new life. Her parents stayed silent. Nolenga continued slowly. When I moved to Merna City, I started working at a small beach cafe. I cleaned tables, served coffee, and worked long hours every day. It wasn't easy, but I never gave up. Belisa crossed her arms, clearly uncomfortable now. After some time, I saved enough money to buy that cafe, Nolenga said. Then I improved it, expanded it, and opened more restaurants along the coast. She looked directly at her parents. Today, those restaurants are part of one of the most successful food chains in Merna City. Her father lowered the paper slowly, staring at her with disbelief. And the house? He asked quietly. Nolenga took a small breath before answering. Years ago, when the bank took this property because of the debts, they quietly put it up for auction. My advisor told me about it. She glanced around the house again. So I bought it. Belisa shook her head quickly. No, that doesn't make sense. But Nolenga continued calmly. I didn't buy it to embarrass you, she said. I bought it because, despite everything, I didn't want my parents to lose their home. Her mother's eyes widened. Her father's hands began shaking slightly as the truth slowly sank in. All those years they believed their daughter had failed. They believed Belisa's stories. They believed Nolenga had been arrogant and selfish. But the reality was now standing right in front of them. The daughter they had rejected, the woman they had thrown out of Thanksgiving dinner, was the owner of the house, and possibly much more than they had ever imagined. The room felt heavy with silence. Nolenga's parents stared at her, their mouths slightly open, as if trying to find words but failing. Belisa, however, quickly recovered from the shock, her confident facade returning, though this time it was mixed with nervousness. She stepped forward, her voice softening. Nolenga, we are sisters, Belisa said, holding out her arms. We should forgive each other. Let's forget what happened yesterday. Please. Nolenga looked at her, calm and steady. Her heart raced, but she didn't step toward her sister. Instead, she gently stepped back, keeping a small but firm distance. You want forgiveness? Nolenga said, her voice quiet but filled with strength. Do you remember last night? Belisa frowned, pretending to think. Last night? I don't understand. Nolenga shook her head slowly. I do. You saw me a mother with my little son. And you wanted us out. You wanted me to leave because you were uncomfortable. She took a deep breath. And my parents, they chose you over me. They opened the door and pushed us into the cold. Kito clung to her hand, looking up at her with wide eyes. Nolenga knelt down, gathering him in her arms for a brief moment, then stood tall again. Family, she said, her eyes locking with Belisa's and her parents. Family doesn't abandon a mother and child because someone feels uncomfortable. That's not forgiveness. That's not love. That's weakness disguised as care. Belisa's face turned pale. She opened her mouth but no words came out. Her father's hands trembled slightly, and her mother pressed a hand over her mouth, realizing for the first time the weight of what they had done. Nolenga's calm presence filled the room, like a tide pushing back years of lies and pain. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. But every word she spoke carried the power of truth and justice. You thought you could humiliate me and my son, and I would just disappear, she continued. You thought you could make me small while you kept your comfort? She shook her head, a soft smile of quiet strength on her face. I walked away for years. I forgave you silently. I built my life while you believed I was failing. But I will not forgive humiliation. I will not forgive disrespect. Belisa's hands dropped to her sides. She looked around, realizing the daughter she had mocked was no longer the same girl she had pushed out into the night. Nolenga took a deep breath and looked at her parents once more. I am done begging for acceptance. You wanted to treat us as outsiders tonight. I stand as the owner of this house. And I hope you finally understand what it means to respect family. The room was silent again, but this time it was heavy with the truth, unshakable and undeniable. Nolenga looked around the room one last time. Her parents and Belisa were still frozen in shock, their faces pale and guilty. The silence was thick, almost unbearable. She took a deep breath and spoke calmly, her voice steady and clear. I won't throw you out, she said. You can stay here, but under one condition. You will live in this house as tenants, paying rent like anyone else. Her father's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her mother's eyes filled with tears and Belisa looked down, unable to meet Nolanga's gaze. This isn't revenge, Nolanga continued. It's a lesson. A reminder that respect is earned, even from family. Kito tugged at her hand, sensing the tension in the room. Nolanga knelt for a moment and hugged him tightly. It's okay, my love, she whispered. We are safe. We have everything we need. Word of the meeting spread quickly through Kavunda Bay. Neighbors whispered and friends called, amazed at the story. How the daughter who was kicked out of Thanksgiving dinner had quietly become the owner of the very house her family had thrown her and her child out of. Soon everyone in town knew. Nolanga's name was on everyone's lips, not as the girl who was humiliated, but as the woman who had turned pain into power. Her parents and Belisa, for the first time, understood what it meant to underestimate her. They had believed lies, judged her unfairly, and humiliated her, and now they had to face the truth. Nolanga smiled softly, holding Kito's hand as they walked to the door. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden light across the garden. She felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of justice that didn't need shouting or anger, only courage and patience. As they stepped outside, Kito looked up at her and asked, Mom, are they going to be okay? Nolanga smiled down at him, brushing his hair from his forehead. They'll learn, she said gently, and so will everyone else. Respect, even from family, is something you have to earn. Hand in hand, mother and son walked away from the house, leaving the past behind, stronger and wiser than ever, ready to live their life on their own terms.